Hey guys, let's take a look at this Jeep. It's got a lot of stuff on it. Roof rack, light bars, winch, stinger. That's an intercooler there because it has a supercharger on it. I'm not sure what the story is. I know this engine hasn't been in here long with the supercharger and it's leaking out water where it shouldn't be. Probably a blown head gasket. Dual air compressor, ARB, cold air intake. I don't know what this stuff is over here. So, what are we going to do with this Jeep? Well, this is a pretty option Jeep, as you can see. He's already got a medical game changer on here. 6-pack shocks, Duraflex joints, variable rate springs. This is a really nice suspension system, but we're probably going to change it out, stepping it up. We're probably going to go with a Elite chassis, maybe an Evo double throwdown. We're not really sure yet. It's got to take horsepower because this Jeep's going to get an LT-4 supercharged LT direct injected engine, and we're going to put an 8-speed behind it. It's going to take this anemic little 3.6 with a 5-speed and really wake it up. Let's take a look at this LT-4 engine. Okay, so here's the little LT-4 engine tucked away. And when I say little, this is an all-aluminum 6.2 liter engine, and it's pretty lightweight. If you consider that this engine puts out over 650 horsepower, and its bigger brother, the LT-5, over 750 horsepower, for the size and the weight, it's just incredible. So this is a water-to-air intercooler that's built into the blower valley on the LT-4. We are not running a power steering pump in the LT-4 just like the other LT engines. This is continuous variable valve timing. That's why you got these 3 sensors here. This is your cam sensor, this is your phaser, and this is your dual stage oil pressure. Now the LT1 and the LT4s run a scavenge tube, and I'm not sure if you can see it, but it starts down there on the oil pan and it comes up to this catch can up here, and we're going to retain that. We are going to use weld-in mounts. We're actually doing a couple of different LT4 builds. This chassis over here is going to get an LT4, and we are putting some weld-in mounts in it right now. And let's get back to the other Jeep. Guys, this is an L83. This Jeep is getting an LT1. I do believe the chassis is around here somewhere. This Jeep is getting an LT1. As you can see, we got LTs everywhere. Yeah, here's a typical LT1 that we're going to get ready to drop the body in. Now let's take a look at a couple of things here in this LT1. This is a brand new crate GM Performance LT1. You can see it has these stainless manifolds. You can see that it's running our hydraulic easy bolt-in mounts. Brand new GM 8L90 transmission. We are running a 241J on this build, and they are a pretty strong transfer case. Now, you could break it if you really tried, and we're not going to run that behind the LT4. This is a factory GM harness. These are the connectors for the E92 computer. This is going to be our power distribution center. This is the chassis emissions harness, and these are factory GM plugs. So you're not hybriding, you're not running a hot rod harness. If you look over here, this is the OE AC compressor, variable displacement. You can see it got plugged right into the factory GM harness. This is our billet adapter for AC lines, and we supply AC lines in the kit. Again, there's our hydraulic motor mount. This 8L90 is running a connector at the back of the valve body, but the TCM is not inside of this transmission like it is in the 6L80. This is actually the TCM connector here, and that's going to be up in the engine compartment. And it's running a T87 or a T87A controller. You can see that we're still running our standard dual stud heavy-duty transmission mount, which we haven't had any issues with in these LTs, even with the amount of torque that they put out. Guys, make sure that you run this fuel tank skid. In fact, in our builds, what we end up doing is we run a little L bracket, just like the JL does now, to shield this plastic fuel tank from heat. As you can see, we have the stock power steering pump fitted to this LT engine, and again, the LTs don't come with power steering pumps, so that's a bracket of our own making. The steam port on the LT1 engine is right in the thermostat housing. It's a lot easier than the older LS engines where they had a crossover pipe. Now, some of you guys might have noticed that this 8-speed transmission has a dipstick tube, and yes, we run a dipstick tube. What we do is we actually get our own dipstick tube, and you can see a little spacer here. If you don't have this, you have to get under the oil pan, and there's a little tube that sticks up. You got to use a J-hook fill adapter, and you fill the transmission up until it comes out. It's kind of like the old European transmissions like the Jaguars and stuff, but we find it's a lot more convenient if we just run a dipstick tube. So we figured out a configuration where we can run a dipstick tube with an 8L90, and it just makes things easier. One of the nice things about these harnesses, as you can see, this is the factory Jeep harness, and you'll notice where it gets near the exhaust, Jeep puts this heat tape on, and GM does the same thing on everything that's near the exhaust, and that's really a nice touch. If you're running a aftermarket hot rod harness, usually they don't pay that much attention to detail. Even over here where the transmission is and the exhaust is going to come through, they put heat tape on it. You notice that these stainless manifolds, they're made by GM, they're very efficient, and they got really thick flanges. This looks to be about a ½ an inch, and then they stress relieve it by putting these cuts in for longevity. The old small block Chevys, the manifolds would warp and start to leak. We're using stainless steel shim gaskets. These engines are really designed for durability. Now these engines have a fuel pump inside the valley that powers the direct injection. It's thousands of PSI of pressure. It's driven off the camshaft. So let's get back to our project build here. This Jeep is tall and heavy, which basically means we have a high center of gravity, so on off-camber trails it's going to get a little bit touchy. So we're going to try to combat that. One, we got metal cloak armor. I have the same armor on my Jeep, and it's excellent armor, but it does add 300 to 400 pounds to the vehicle. The roof rack and whatever he's got up there on top is going to raise our center of gravity. We are going to be running these 40-inch tires, but we're going to change the rims out because we're upgrading the axles. We're going to go to some wide axles, 72.5-inch axles, and by doing that, we're going to increase the track. As you can see, that this Jeep is tall and narrow, which isn't really good for off-camber situations. So with a wider axles, it's going to give it more stability, and it's probably going to reduce the turning radius. You might have to do a couple of three-pointers, but in a heavy Jeep like this, where he wants to wheel it up in the trails at Moab and a Rubicon, it's going to definitely make it a little bit safer. These are the same metal cloak fenders that I have on my Jeep. You can pull these bolts out here and move this fender to get better articulation. Again, we're going to see where we end up with the suspension on this, but one of the considerations that we have is strength, because this LT-4 is going to be putting out not only 660 horsepower, but probably more torque than any of the engines on the market today at low RPM. And that's due to the continuous variable valve timing and the high compression that the LT engines run. With the LSs and the earlier Hemis, they would build power up, but in a higher rev range, where the LT is right off the line. It's like a diesel. They're putting that instant torque out, and we've actually broken quite a few components. So you can see he's only got 44s in here. They're not going to last with an LT-4. We're going to definitely upgrade these axles. What I look at, and he's done a pretty good job here, is where this track bar connects to the axle and where this drag link connects to the spindle. They're about in the same plane off the ground. If this were a, let's say, a low steer, or if they weren't in the same plane, what happens is when this axle goes up and down, that drag link's going to move, and you're going to have unwanted steering input. So it's time to get to tearing this Jeep down, and I think you're going to be surprised when we get the LT-4 in here. I think it's going to look a lot cleaner than this looks right now. So stay tuned for this build. And again, we got another LT-4 build going on down the shop, and we're going to do something on that too.